Good day to all of you. So this is Computer Organization and Architecture 10th edition by William Stomings. So let's start with chapter 11, which is all about digital logic. The operation of the digital computer is based on the storage and processing of binary data. Throughout this course, we have assumed the existence of storage elements that can exist in one of two stable states and of circuits that can operate on binary data under the control of control signals to implement the various computer functions. So in this chapter, we suggest how these storage elements and circuits can be implemented in digital logic, specifically with combinational and sequential circuits. So the chapter begins with a brief review of Boolean algebra, which is the mathematical foundation of digital logic. Next, the concept of a gate is introduced. Finally, combinational and sequential circuits, which are constructed from gates, are described. So next is we have Boolean algebra. So the digital circuitry in digital computers and other digital systems is designed, and its behavior is analyzed with the use of a mathematical discipline known as Boolean algebra. So the name is in honor of an English mathematician, George Boole, who proposed the basic principles of this algebra in 1854 in his treatise, An Investigation of the Laws of Thought, on which to found the mathematical theories of logic and probabilities. In 1938, Claude Shannon, a research assistant in the electrical engineering department at MIT, suggested that Boolean algebra could be used to solve problems in relay switching circuit design. Shannon's techniques were subsequently used in the analysis and design of electronic digital circuits. Boolean algebra turns out to be a convenient tool in two areas. So first is for analysis. It is economical way of describing the function of digital circuitry and also design. Given a desired function, Boolean algebra can be applied to develop a simplified implementation of that function. So as with any algebra, Boolean algebra makes use of variables and operations. So in this case, the variables and operations are logical variables and operations. Thus, a variable may take on the value 1, which is also equivalent to true, or 0, or false. So the basic logical operations are and, or, and not, which are symbolically represented by dot, plus sign, and overbar. So A and B, so its connotation is we have the asterisk, and A or B is the plus sign, and then not A, and then we have A and then the overbar. So the operation AND yields true or binary value 1 if and only if both of its operands are true. The operation OR yields true if either or both of its operands are true. The unary operator NOT inverts the value of its operand. In the absence of parentheses, the AND operation takes precedence over the OR operation. Also, when no ambiguity will occur, the AND operation is represented by simple concatenation instead of the dot operator. So in table 11.a, so we have this one, defines the basic logical operations in a form known as a truth table, which lists the value of an operation for every possible combination of values of operands. So the table also lists three other useful operators, which is the XOR. Then we also have the NAND and NOR. The exclusive or the XOR of two logical operands is 1 if and only if exactly one of the operands has the value 1. The NAND function is the complement or the NOT of the AND function, and the NOR, of course, is the complement of OR. As we shall see, these three new operations can be useful in implementing certain digital circuits. The logical operations, with the exception of NOT, can be generalized to more than two variables as shown in 11.1b. Okay, next is we have 11.2, the basic identities of Boolean algebra, summarizes key identities of Boolean algebra. The equations have been arranged into two columns to show the complementary or dual nature of the AND and OR operations. There are two classes of identities: the basic rules or postulates, which are stated without proof, and other identities that can be derived from the basic postulates. So the postulates define the way in which the Boolean expressions are interpreted. So we will have another video on how to prove these basic postulates and other identities of the Boolean algebra. So next is we have the fundamental building block of all digital logic circuits is the gate. Logical functions are implemented by the interconnection of gates. So a gate is an electronic circuit that produces an output signal that is a simple Boolean operation on its input signals. The basic gates used in digital logic are AND, OR, NOT, NAND, NOR, and XOR. So we have figure 11.1 depicts these 6 gates. So each gate is defined in 3 ways, by means of a graphic symbol, an algebraic notation, and truth table. The symbology used in this chapter is from the IEEE standard, the IEEE standard 91. Note that the inversion or the NOT operation is indicated by a circle. So each gate is shown in figure 11.1 has 1 or 2 inputs and 1 output. However, as indicated in table 11.1b in the previous table, all of the gates except NOT can have more than 2 inputs. Thus, for we have an example, the X or Y or Z can be implemented with a single OR gate with 3 inputs. When one or more of the values at the input are changed, the correct output signal appears almost instantaneously, delayed only by the propagation time of signals through the gate, known as the gate delay. The significance of this delay is discussed in this section. So in some cases, a gate is implemented with 2 outputs, one output being the negation of the other output. So here we introduce a common term. We say that to assert a signal is to cause a signal line to make a transition from its logically false or 0 state to its logically true or 1 state. The true or 1 state is either a high or low voltage state, depending on the type of electronic circuitry. Typically, not all gate types are used in implementation. Design and fabrication are simpler if only 1 or 2 types of gates are used. Thus, it is important to identify functionally complete sets of gates. This means that any Boolean function can be implemented using only the gates in the set. So the following are the functionally complete sets. Either the usage of AND or NOT, or just and not, or not, and then NAND, and then NOR. It should be clear that the AND, OR, and NOT gates constitute a functionally complete set because they represent the 3 operations of Boolean algebra. For the AND and NOT gates to form a functionally complete set, there must be a way to synthesize the OR operation from the AND and NOT operations. This can be done by applying the De Morgan's theorem. Similarly, the OR and NOT operations are functionally complete because they can be used to synthesize the AND operation. So in this figure, 11.2 shows how the AND, OR, and NOT functions can be implemented solely with NAND gates by the use of the De Morgan's theorem. And then figure 11.3 shows the same thing for the NOR gates. For this reason, digital circuits can be and frequently are implemented solely with NAND gates or solely with NOR gates. So with the gates, we have reached the most primitive circuit level of computer hardware. An examination of the transistor combinations used to construct gate departs from the realm and enters the realm of electrical engineering. For our purposes, however, we are content to describe how gates can be used as building blocks to implement the essential logical circuits of a digital computer. So we have the next topic is all about combinational circuit. So a combinational circuit is an interconnected set of gates whose output at any time is a function only of the input at that time. As with a single gate, the appearance of the input is followed almost immediately by the appearance of the output with only gate delays. In general terms, a combinational circuit consists of n binary inputs and m binary outputs. As with a gate, a combinational circuit can be defined in 3 ways: by means of a truth table, for each of the 2 raised to n possible combinations of input signals, the binary value of each of the m output signals is listed. For example, if you have 2 inputs, so that's n is equals to 2, then 2 raised to 2 is equal to 4. So it means you have 4 outputs. And then another example, if you have 3 inputs, so n is equals to 3, make that as exponent, so 2 raised to 3 is equals to 8. So it means you have 8 inputs. Then if you have 4 inputs, then we have 16 outputs, and then so on and so forth. So next is we have graphical symbols. The interconnected layout of gates is depicted. And then Boolean equations, each output signal is expressed as a Boolean function of its input signals. So any Boolean function can be implemented in electronic form as a network of gates. For any given function, there are a number of alternative realizations. Consider the Boolean function represented by the truth table in this table. We have 11.3, a Boolean function of 3 variables. As you can see, since this is 3 variables or 3 inputs, we have 8 outputs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So there are 3 combinations of input values that cause f to be 1. So we have this one, the third, the fourth, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the 7th. So that's why there is 3. So the result is 1. So this form of expression for self-evident reasons is known as the sum of products or the SOP form. And then in figure 11.4, shows a straightforward implementation with AND, OR, and NOT gates. This is the circuit for the table 11.3 previously. So this is 11.3, the truth table, and this is the corresponding logic gate. And then next is if we have sums of products, we have also the product of sums or POS form, which is illustrated in figure 11.5. So this is one. So for clarity, NOT gates are not shown. So because it is simplified by the NOT C, the NOT A, the NOT A, NOT C here, and NOT A, NOT B, and NOT C. So that is for simplification of visualization. Rather, it is assumed that each input signal and its complement are available. This simplifies the logic diagram, as I've said, and makes the inputs to the gates more readily apparent. Thus, a Boolean function can be realized in either SOP or POS form. At this point, it would seem that the choice would depend on whether the truth table contains more ones or zeros for the output functions. The SOP has one term for each one, and the POS has one term for each zero. However, there are other considerations such as it is often possible to derive a simpler Boolean expression from the truth table than either SOP or POS. It may be preferable to implement the function with a single gate type, which is either NAND or NOR. And then the significance of the first point is that with a simpler Boolean expression, fewer gates will be needed to implement the function. 3 methods that can be used to achieve simplification are by means of algebraic simplification, Carnot maps, and the Quine-McCluskey tables. Okay, next is we have figure 11.6. So we have algebraic simplification, as mentioned in the previous slide, involves the application of the identities of the table 11.2 to reduce the Boolean expression to one with fewer elements. So we're going to use the basic identities of Boolean algebra in order to simplify the equation. So for example, consider again the equation of 11.1 and the previous tables. So this expression can be implemented as shown in this, again, figure. So the simplification of this equation was done essentially by observation. And then for more complex expressions, some more systematic approach is needed. So we'll be having, again, a separate video for an example of algebraic simplification. Okay, next. We have algebraic simplification. We have another one. So for purposes of simplification, The Carnot map is a convenient way of representing a Boolean function of a small number, up to 4 of variables. So this is very ideal if you have up to 4 variables. So the map is an array of 2 raised to n squares representing all possible combinations of values of n binary variables. So figure 11.7a. Okay, so this is the equation, shows the map of 4 squares for a function of 2 variables. So if you have 2 variable, it means you have 4 possible combinations. It is essential for later purposes to list the combinations in the order of 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 0. As you can see, the order 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 0. Maybe you're going to ask, why not make it 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1? The problem there is that if you're going to interchange 0, 1, and 1, 0, the goal here is for every adjacent values, they should have at least one different variable. For this one, for the first 0, 0, and 0, 1, the difference is in the second value. And then while for 0, 1, and 1, 1, the difference is in the first value. And then last but not the least, for 1, 1, and 1, 0, is the difference again is in the second value. But if you're going to interchange 1, 0 with to the position of 1, 1, what will happen is we have 0, 1, and then 1, 0. Is there, are they have the same values? No, because 0 became 1 and 1 became 0. So you will have a problem if the order is interchanged between 1, 1, and 1, 0. So you always have to remember that this is the value. So because the squares corresponding to the combinations are to be used for recording information, the combinations are customarily written above the squares. In the case of 3 variables, the representation is an arrangement of 8 squares, as can be seen in letter B. So if you have 3 variables, we have A, B, and C. So you have 2 raised to 3 is equals to 8. So that's why you have 8 squares. And then again, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 0, and then 0, 1. Actually, you can do this rectangle either this in this fashion or in the other, in which the value of the 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 0, and then 0, 1 at the above. So there's no, the result is just the same. So with the values for one of the variables to the left and for the other 2 variables above the squares. And then for 4 variables, as you can see, 16 squares are needed with the arrangement indicated in figure 11.7c. So we have that. So we have this one, the order just like with letter A and B. And then we have for the leftmost side, we have 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 0. So the map can be used to represent any Boolean function in the following way. So each square corresponds to a unique product in the sum of products form, while a 1 value corresponding to the variable and a 0 value corresponding to the not of that variable. For each such product in the function, 1 is placed in the corresponding square. Given the truth table of a Boolean function, it is an easy matter to construct the map. For each combination of values of variables that produce a result of 1 in the truth table, fill in the corresponding square of the map with 1. So with figure 11.7b, shows the result for the truth table of 11.3 in the previous slides. So to convert from a Boolean expression to a map, it is necessary to put the expression into what is referred to as a canonical form. Each term in the expression must contain each variable. So this one is in canonical form because all the 3 variables are present. For 11.7c, so we have 4 variables A, B, C, and D. So that's why you can see here that all the variables in every term is present. So for example, so if we have equation for 11.3, we must first expand it into a full form of equation and then convert this to a map. So you always have to convert this first into canonical form before you're going to put it in Carnot mapping. So the labeling used in figure 11.7 point D emphasizes the relationship between the variables and the rows and columns of the map. Here, the two rows embraced by the symbol A are those in which the variable A has the value 1. So this has the value 1. And then the rows not embraced by the symbol A are those in which A is 0 for this one. So for this one, the value here of C is 1 and then here is 0. For B, this is 1 and then here is 0. And then for D, this is the value of for D is 1 and then here is we have 0. Okay. Next is we have additional examples. So once you've already map of a function is created, we can often write a simple algebraic expression for it by noting the arrangement of the ones in the map. So the principle is as follows. Any two squares that are adjacent differ in only one of the two variables. If two adjacent squares both have an entry of 1, then the corresponding product terms differ in only one variable, as I've explained with the values of 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, and 1, 0. In such a case, the two terms can be merged by eliminating that variable. So this process can be extended in several ways. First, the concept of adjacency can be extended to include wrapping around the edge of the map. So thus, the top square of a column is adjacent to the bottom of the square, and the leftmost square of a row is adjacent to the rightmost square. And then these conditions are illustrated in figures 11.8b and C. So we have B and C. So imagine it as a cylinder in which, though this is in the upper portion and the one here is in the lower part, assuming this edge and this edge are connected, and then for letter C, so this edge and this edge is also connected so that you can group these two ones together. So the next three examples in figure 11.8 show groupings of four squares. So we have for D, E, and F. So note that in this case, two of the variables can be eliminated. And then the last three examples, G, H, and letter I, show the groupings of 8 square which allow three variables to be eliminated. So that's why if you have two squares, you can see you have a missing variable which is C. So here is we have A, and then here is again we have C. And then if you have 4 square, it means that you only have two variables left. So here we have A, not A and B. And then here for this example is B and not C. And then for letter F, we have B and not D. And then if you have 8 number of ones, so because this is a large grouping, so you will only be left with, for this example, not A, and then this is not D, and then we have C for these examples. So we can summarize the rules for simplification as follows. Among the marked squares or squares with a 1, find those that belong to a unique largest block of 1, 2, 4, or 8 and circle those blocks. So again, it's either 1, 2, 4, 8, powers of 2. Okay? Odd number of ones are not in one group are not allowed because you can't read it, I swear. And then select additional blocks of marked squares that are as large as possible and as few in number as possible. So for example, if you have seen these blocks, you can group those 8 ones. Actually, this is better because it means you will have a result which is simpler compared if you have 4 number of ones and 2 number of ones. So and then the results may not be unique in some cases. For example, if a marked square combines with exactly two other squares and there is no fourth marked square to complete a larger group, then there is a choice to be made as to which of the two groupings to choose. So there is also a possibility that for the equation, that there is a possibility that it's not unique. When you are circling groups, you are allowed to use the same one value more than once. And then continue to draw loops around single marked squares or pairs of adjacent marked squares, or groups of 4, 8, and so on in such a way that every marked square belongs to at least one loop. And then use as few of these blocks as possible to include all marked squares. And then we have figure 11.9, all about overlapping groups. So based on table 11.3, illustrates the simplification process. If any isolated ones remain after the groupings, then each of this is circled as a group of ones. Okay, so we have 11.9a. So since we have 3, you cannot group that into 3. So what you're going to do, since these are powers of 2, so group this into 2, and then another 1, and then you have an overlapping 1 here. And then finally, before going from the map to a simplified Boolean expression, any group of 1 that is completely overlapped by other groups can be eliminated. This is shown in figure 11.9b. In this case, the horizontal group is redundant and may be ignored in creating the Boolean expression. So this is an example here. So we have, you have imagined that at the start, you have grouped this two ones. But then again, since you have grouped this two ones also and this another one, what are you going to do with the first group of ones? Actually, you can already eliminate it, because if you're going to include it, you have another term, which is actually, since this one is already belong to this group and this one is also or belonging to this other group, you should have at most two terms only. But if you've included this one, that is not a simplified version because you have three terms. So one additional feature of Carnot maps needs to be mentioned. In some cases, certain combinations of values of variables never occur. Therefore, the corresponding output never occurs. So these are referred to as the don't care conditions. For each such condition, the letter D, or in other notation, it is the notation is instead of D, it's an X, is entered into corresponding squares of the map. In doing the grouping and simplification, each D can be treated as a 1 or 0, whichever leads to the simplest expression. So we have table 11.4. So shows the truth table for producing a 4-bit result that is one more than a 4-bit BCD or binary coded decimal input. So the addition is modulo 10. So that's why 9 plus 1 is equal to 0. Also, note that the 6 of the input codes produce don't care results because those are not valid inputs. So these are don't care because we have, this is 10 because a BCD, since decimal, so we only have numbers from 0 to 9. So if you're going to represent 10 to 15, so this should be composed of at least 2 digits. So that's why from 10 to 15, these are don't care conditions. So that's why, as you can see with the output, you have letter D. Okay, next is we have figure 11.10. These are the Carnot maps for the incrementer on the truth table in the last slide, previous slide. So as Dave said, so shows the resulting Carnot maps for each of the output variables. So the D-squares are used to achieve the best possible groupings. So we have for letter A, 11.10a. So as it said, we don't have to group the don't care conditions. Use it sparingly or use it if it's necessary. But you don't have to group them just to encircle them. The important thing is you have to encircle the 1. Actually, with this example, you can also group 1 with the don't care. So this will be more simpler into 3 variables. And then we have this one for letter B. So again, we've left out some of the don't cares. And of course, for this example, you haven't used any don't care here, but actually, this is for the errata of this slides. This one should be grouped here at the lower portion. Okay, and then we have this one. So this is the best one, the best combination. We have Z is equal to not D. Okay, next is we have another type aside from algebraic simplification and Carnot mapping. We have another which is called the Quine-McCluskey method. For more than four variables, since Carnot mapping method becomes increasingly cumbersome. With five variables, so for five variables, n is equals to 5, then 2 raised to n, 2 raised to 5 is equal to 32 outputs. So we need two 16 by 16 maps are needed. So 16 plus 16 is equal to 32, with one map considered to be on the top of the other in three dimensions to achieve adjacency. Six variables, which is more than, of course, five, require the use of four 16 by 16 tables in four dimensions because 2 raised to 6 is equal to 64. An alternative approach is a tabular technique. So instead of using Carnot mapping, which becomes cumbersome if you're going to use for more than four variables, we can use the tabular technique, which is referred to as the Quine-McCluskey method. So the method is suitable for programming on a computer to give an automatic tool for producing minimized Boolean expression. So we have the first step is to conduct a table in which each row corresponds to one of the product terms of the expression. The terms are grouped according to the number of complemented variables. That is, we start with a term with no complements. If it exists, then all terms with one complement and so on. So from this table shows the list for our example expression with horizontal lines used to indicate the grouping. For clarity, each term is represented by a 1 for each uncomplemented variable and a 0 for each complemented variable. So for this one, so 0 here is we have the not. So that's why we have A is 0, B is 0, Z is 0, and then D is 1. So that's why we have A and not B and not C and D. So thus we group terms according to the number of ones they contain. The index column is simply the decimal equivalent and is useful in what follows. So for 1, why is it index 1? You have to assume that the value here is 1, 2, 4, 8. And then with every one, we're just going to add them. So for example, if we have 12 here, so we have 1, 1, 0. Since the value here is 1, 2, 4, and 8, then the 1 is in A and B. So 4 plus 8 is equal to 12. So that's how you get the index for every product term. Okay, the next step is to find all pairs of terms that differ only in one variable. That is, all pairs of terms that are the same except that one variable is 0 in one of the terms and 1 in the other. Because of the way in which we have grouped the terms, we can do this by starting with the first group and comparing each term of the first group with every term of the second group. Then compare each term of the second group with all of the terms of the third group, and so on. Whenever a match is found, place a check next to each term. Combine the pair by eliminating the variable that differs in the two terms and add that to a new list. This process continues until the entire original table has been examined. The new table is organized into groups, as indicated, in the same fashion as the first table. The second table is then processed in the same manner as the first, that is, terms that differ in only one variable are checked and a new term produced for a third table. In this example, the third table that is produced contains only one term, which is B and D. In general, the process would proceed through successive tables until a table with no matches was produced. In this case, this has involved three tables. So we have next one, table 11.6, the last stage of the Quine-McCluskey method. Once the process just described is completed, we have eliminated many of the possible terms of the expression. Those terms that have not been eliminated are used to construct a matrix as illustrated in this table. So each row of the matrix corresponds to one of the terms that have not been eliminated or has no check in any of the tables used so far. So each column corresponds to one of the terms in the original expression. An X is placed in each intersection, as you can see, an X is placed. So these are all X of a row and a column such that the row element is compatible with the column element. That is, the variable present in the row element have the same value as the variables present in the column element. For example, B and D. So B and D exist here in A and B and C and D. So we have an X here. It's also available here. We have A and B, not C and D. So the B and D here. So we have put an X. And then also B and D here. So there's an X. And then another B and D here. So we have an X. So that's what we are going to do. And then we have not A, not C and D. So this is available here. So we have not A, not C and D. And another one is we have A, B, C, and not A, not B, not C, and then D. So that's why there's also an X. So next, after putting those X's, next, circle each X that is alone in the column. So meaning, so let's find in the column, for every column, so we have two X's here. We also have the second column here. And then for this one, since this is alone, we have to put a circle around the X. And then for another one, since this is alone, put X, a circle on the around the X. And for this one, and then for last for this, not A, not B, not C, and D. Okay, after putting a circle in each X, then place a square around each X in any row which there is a circled X. So, for B and D, since there is no circled X, we're not going to put an X with a rectangle. So, we have for not A, not C, and D, since there is a circled X here, we have to put this X with a rectangle around the X. And then another one for this, we have this one. So any other X here, we have to put a rectangle for this one, another rectangle, and then for A, C, and D, another rectangle. Okay, then if every, rather rectangle or square, if every column now has either a squared or a circled X, then we are done. And those row elements whose X's have been marked constitute the minimal expression. So in cases in which some columns, for this one we have B and D, have neither a circle nor a square, additional processing is required. Essentially, we keep adding rows elements until all columns are covered. Okay, for this ones, for the Quine-McCluskey, I will provide another video to illustrate how Quine-McCluskey is done. So next is we have for the this figure, so another consideration in the implementation of Boolean functions concern the types of gates used. It is sometimes desirable to implement a Boolean function solely with NAND gates or solely with NOR gates. So actually, in the actual gate implementation, real-world implementation of the circuits, it's either NAND or NOR is used, but not a combination of both NAND and NOR. You have to choose. If it's NAND, it's exclusively NAND gates, or if it's NOR, it's just exclusively NOR gate implementation. Although this may not be the minimum gate implementation, it has the advantage of regularity, which can simplify the manufacturing process. So that is the reason as to why most fabrication plans of creating a circuit only goes with the NAND implementation or NOR implementation. Okay, next, we have already finished with the simplifying Boolean expression by using algebraic simplification, Karnaugh mapping, and the Quine-McCluskey method. Then we have another illustration here of a circuit. So a multiplexer connects multiple inputs. So that's why it's called multiplexer. Multiple inputs to a single output. At any time, one of the inputs is selected to be passed to the output. A general block diagram representation is shown in this figure, which is 11.2. This represents a 4-to-1 multiplexer. So 4-to-1 meaning we have 4 inputs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 output. So that is the notation for multiplexer. 4 here is the input, and 1 here is the output. Multiplexer always only has 1 output. There are 4 input lines. As you can see, we have D0, D1, D2, and D3. One of these lines is selected to provide the output signal F. To select one of the four possible inputs, a 2-bit selection code is needed because since we have 4 here, it's a power of 2. So we have 2 selection code. And this is implemented as the two select lines labeled S1 and S2. So what if you have 8? 8 to 1 multiplexer, it means if you have 8 um, select 8 channels or inputs, so you have 3 selection codes. Again, it's a power of 2. Okay, an example of 4 to 1 multiplexer, as shown in the circuit in the previous slide, is defined by the truth table in table 11.7 as shown in the presentation. So this is a simplified form of a truth table. Instead of showing all possible combinations of input variables, it shows the output as data from line D0, D1, D2, or D3. So let's assume this has value. So 0, 0, so that's why it's D0. Let's assume S1 is 1 and then S2 is 2. 1 and 2. 0, 1, since this is 1, so that's why it's D1. And then 1, 0, since the value of S2 is 2, so that's why it's D2. And then next is since S2 and S1 is both 1, 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. That's why it is D3. So in this figure, 11.13, so shows an implementation using AND, OR, and NOT gates. So we have S1 and S2 are the selection lines, are connected to the AND gates. These are the AND gates in such a way that for any combination of S1 and S2, 3 of the AND gates will output 0. So the fourth AND gate will output the value of the selected line, which is either 0 or 1. Thus, 3 of the inputs to the OR gate are always 0, and the output of the OR gate will equal the value of the selected input gate. So using this regular organization, it is easy to construct multiplexers of size of 8 to 1, as I've already included in the discussion, 16 to 1, and so on. So actually, the actual example of a multiplexer is channels of your television. Have you imagined that, for example, if you choose channel 7, you have 2 signals for example, channel 7 and channel 2? Definitely not. So that is already an actual example of a multiplexer. Even you have many inputs, you will always have just one output. Okay, next is we have multiplexers are used in digital circuits to control signal and data routing. An example is the loading of the program counter or the PC, as we have already seen here for this figure, 11.4. So the value to be loaded into the program counter may come from one of several different sources. So aside from it is used for television channels, it's also used for the program counter. A binary counter if the PC is to be incremented for the next instruction. The instruction register if a branch instruction using a direct address that has just been executed. The output of the ALU or the arithmetic logic unit if the branch instruction specifies the address using a displacement mode. So these various inputs could be connected to the input lines of a multiplexer with the PC connected to the output line. So the select lines determine which value is loaded into the PC. Because the PC contains multiple bits, multiple multiplexers are used, one per bit. So this figure illustrates this for 16-bit addresses. So for 16-bit addresses, you need 16 4 to 1 multiplexer. So that's why there is an ellipsis here, meaning to construct this program 16-bit counter with for the addresses, you need 16 4 to 1 multiplexer. So next, we have a multiplexer, then we have a decoder. So a decoder is a combinational circuit with a number of output lines, only one of which is asserted at any time. Which output line is asserted depends on the pattern of input lines. So in general, a decoder has n inputs and 2 raised to n outputs. So figure 11.15 shows a decoder with 3 inputs and 8 outputs because it's a power of 2. So since we have 3 inputs, A, B, and C, so 2 raised to 3 would equal to 8 outputs. So this is the decoder. You can imagine decoder is opposite of multiplexer. It's just because the number of your inputs here correspond, rather the outputs here correspond to the inputs of the multiplexer. Okay, decoders find many uses in digital computers. One example is address decoding. Suppose we wish to construct a 1 kilobyte memory using 4 256 by 8-bit RAM chips. We want a single unified address space which can be broken down as follows. So for this one, so each chip requires 8 address lines, and these are supplied by lower order 8 bits of the address. The higher order 2 bits of the 10-bit address are used to select one of the 4 RAM chips. For this purpose, we use 2 to 4 decoder to be used whose output enables one of the 4 chips, as shown in this figure. So that's the first application of the decoder. It's used for address decoding. So with an additional input line, a decoder can be used as a demultiplexer. So if you have an additional input line, so the demultiplexer performs the inverse function of a multiplexer. It connects a single input to one of the several outputs. So this block in 11.7 of the 11.17 rather of the figure. So, as before, n inputs are decoded to produce a single one of 2 raised to n outputs. All of the 2 raised to n output lines are ended with a data input line. Thus, the n input act as an address to select a particular output line, and the value of the data input line may be 0 or 1 is routed to that output line. So the configuration in this figure can be viewed in another way. Change the label of the new line from data input, so this one, to enable. This allows for the control of the timing of the decoder. The decoded output appears only when the encoded input is present and the enable line has a value of 1. You can actually, the construction of a multiplexer always starts with the decoder, and you're going to just add this enable line. So that's the technique for constructing the multiplexer. Okay, next, aside from multiplexer, decoder, and then the multiplexer, we only also have the read-only memory or the ROM. So combinational circuits are often referred to as memoryless circuits because their output depends only on their current input and no history of prior inputs is retained. However, there is one sort of memory that is implemented with combinational circuits, namely the read-only memory or the ROM. Recall that a ROM is a memory unit that performs only the read operation. This implies that the binary information stored in a ROM is permanent and was created during the fabrication process. Thus, a given input to the ROM or the address lines always produces the same output or the data lines. Because the outputs are a function only of the present inputs, the ROM is in fact a combinational circuit. So, a ROM can be implemented with a decoder and a set of OR gates. As an example, consider this table, table 11.8. This can be viewed as a truth table with 4 inputs and 4 outputs. So, input x sub 1, x sub 2, x sub 3, and x sub 4 for output, z sub 1, c sub 2, c sub 3, and c sub 4. For each of the 16 possible input values, the corresponding set of values of the outputs is shown. It can also be viewed as defining the contents of a 64-bit ROM consisting of 16 words of 4 bits each. The 4 inputs specify an address, and the 4 outputs specify the contents of the location specified by the address. So the next figure So 11.18 shows how this memory could be implemented using a 4 to 16 decoder and 4 OR gates. As with the PLA, programmable logic array, a regular organization is used and the interconnections are made to reflect the desired result. So this figure, as I mentioned earlier, figure 11.8 is a 64-bit ROM. So shows how this memory could be implemented using, as previously mentioned, using a 4 to 16 decoder and 4 OR gates. Okay, so this is already a ROM. The base here is a decoder. Okay, binary addition differs from Boolean algebra in that the result includes a carry term. However, addition can still be dealt with Boolean terms. In this table, 11.9a, we have a single bit addition. We show the logic for adding two input bits to produce a one-bit sum and a carry bit. So this truth table could easily be implemented in digital logic. However, we are not interested in performing addition on just a single pair of bits. Rather, we wish to add two n-bit numbers. This can be done by putting together a set of others so that the carry from one other is provided as input to the next. So single bit addition. So it means if you're going to use this, you can only use this for single bit. So we have 0 plus 0, of course, 0, then no carry. 0 plus 1, we have 1 and then no carry. 1 plus 0 is 1 without carry. And then 1 plus 1 is we have 0 carry 1. So we cannot, for example, this carry, we could not put this as input to the next adder. So that's why for multiple bit adder to work, each of the single bit adders must have three inputs, including the carry from the next lower order adder. So the revised truth table appears in 11.9b. So we have this one. So instead of A and B only, we have C sub in for the carry in. So we have this one. So for 0 plus 0, so you don't have a sum, and then 0 plus 1 is 1 without the carry, and then 1 plus 0 is 1 without also carry, and then 1 plus 1, 0 carry 1. What if you also already have a carry 1 here, so that will be a sum without a carry, and then 1 plus 1 is 0 carry 1, 1 plus 1 is 0 carry 1 here, and 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 1 with the carry. So that's why this is more efficient if you have a multiple bit adder to work. So this is already an illustration of a 4-bit adder. So for this example, you can use this to add 4 values or 4 bits. Okay, next is we have the figure for the implementation of an adder. So figure 11.20 implementation of an adder using AND, OR, and NOT gates. And then thus we have the necessary logic to implement a multiple bit adder as shown in figure 11.21. So this example has an 8-bit adder. So note that because the output from each adder depends on the carry from the previous adder, for example, we have here, so this depends on the input of the previous adder here. The direction is from going from right to left. Just like if you're adding a number in real life. So there is an increasing delay, of course, because you're going to wait for the rightmost input. There's an increasing delay from the least significant to the most significant bit. Each single bit adder experiences a certain amount of gate delay, and this gate delay accumulates. For larger adders, the accumulated delay can become unacceptably high, specifically if you have too many adders that are connected serially. So if the carry values rather could be determined without having to ripple through all the previous stages, then each single bit adder could function independently and delay would not accumulate. This can be achieved with an approach known as a carry look-ahead adder. So in this figure shows how a 32-bit adder, so 32-bit because 8 times 4 is equal to 32 can be constructed out of the 4 8-bit adders, of course. So in this case, the carry must ripple through the 4 8-bit adders, but this will be substantially quicker than a ripple through 32 1-bit adders. So we have already discussed some of the circuits that can be built by using combinational circuits. Next is we have another one which is all about the sequential circuit. So combinational circuits implement the essential functions of a digital computer. However, except for the special case of ROM, they provide no memory or state information, elements also essential to the operation of a digital computer. For the latter purposes, a more complex form of digital logic circuit is used, which is called the sequential circuit. So the current output of a sequential circuit depends not only on the current input, but also on the past history of inputs. Another and generally more useful way to view it is that the current output of a sequential circuit depends on the current input and the current state of that circuit. So in this section, we examine some simple but useful examples of sequential circuits. As will be seen, the sequential circuit makes use of combinational circuits. Actually, the building block of a sequential circuit is also a combinational circuit, but then it has another um, component that makes it different from a combinational circuit. So we have the term flip-flops. So the simplest form of sequential circuit is the flip-flop. There are a variety of flip-flops, all of which share two properties. So the flip-flop is a bistable device. It exists in one of two states and, in the absence of input, remains in that state. Thus, the flip-flop can function as a one-bit memory. So the flip-flop has two outputs which are always the complements of each other. So in this figure, 11.22 shows a common configuration known as the SR flip-flop or the SR latch. So the circuit has two inputs, S which means set and R is equal to reset, and two outputs and consist of two NOR gates connected in a feedback arrangement. So for this one, for the reset, we have the R line here, but it also uses not Q as its input. And then for the S line here, the set line, this NOR gate uses Q as also its input. So this figure shows the NOR SR latch timing diagram. So as you can see with SR, if S is 1, there is no possibility that R is also 1. Because in real life situation, example for a switch, is there a possibility for a switch to be off? The light is on and off at the same time? Because set is equivalent to 1 or on, and then reset is equal to 0 or off. So there's no possibility that they will be at the same state. If S is 1, definitely R is equal to 0. And then if S is equal to 0, then R is equal to 1. So the SR latch can be defined with a table similar to a truth table called a characteristic table, which can be seen here in this presentation, which shows the next state or states of a sequential circuit as a function of current states and inputs. In the case of the SR latch, the state can be defined by the value of Q. So in this table 11.10a shows the resulting characteristic table. Observe that the inputs S is equal to 1 and R is equal to 1 are not allowed because this would produce an inconsistent output. As I've said, there is in no way in real life that S and R will be both 1 because it's really not possible in real life. So that's why for here, we have S and R. The next state is we don't have any values because again, it's not possible. So the table can be expressed more compactly as in 11.10b. So if it's both 0, the next state is also the value of the present state. And then if it is reset, it will be 0. And then if the value here of s is 1, so it will be 1. And then if both are 1, then there is no value. That's actually the problem if you're going to use an SR latch. What if the S and R values both are 1? What value are you going to put in here? So an illustration of the behavior of the SR latch is shown in table 11.10c. So we have this one. So if S here is 1 and then R is 0, then the next state will be 1. And then if both are 0, you're just going to retain the present state. So this is 1 and then 0, 1. And then if R is 1, it will become 0. Since they're both are 0, then just retain the state. And then again, R is equal to 1, so that's why it's 0. Both are 0, so that's why just retain the previous value, which is 0. And then again, S is equal to 1. So it becomes 1. And then since both of them are 0, just retain the previous state, which is 1. So that is the response to series of inputs example. Okay, next is we have the output of the SR latch changes after a brief time delay in response to a change in the input. This is referred to as a synchronous operation. More typically, events in the digital computer are synchronized to a clock pulse, so that changes occur only when a clock pulse occurs. So for this figure, we have the clock SR flip-flop shows this arrangement. So this device is referred to as clocked SR flip-flop because of the signal of the clock. So note that the R and S inputs are passed to the NOR gates only during the clock pulse. So from the addition of the SR latch, we have two AND gates for the R line and then the clock signal, and then also for the S line. So if we already have this, it is called a clock SR flip-flop. Okay, so one problem with SR flip-flop is that the condition R is equal to 1, S is equal to 1 must be avoided. As I've said, it's not possible in real life. So one way to do this is to allow just a single input. So the D flip-flop accomplishes this. So as shown in figure 11.25, shows a gate implementation of the D flip-flop. By using an inverter, the non-clock inputs to the two AND gates are guaranteed to be opposite of each other. So instead of, actually the foundation of this circuit is from the SR. As you can remember, this is the R and then this is the S. Since S and R is equal to 1 must be avoided. So the solution here is we have only one input and then we have the not uncomplemented D, and then we have here is the not D. So that's why we will avoid that both of them have the same value. So the D flip-flop is sometimes referred to as the data. So D is equal to data. Flip-flop because it is, in effect, storage for one bit of data. The output of the D flip-flop is always equal to the most recent value applied to the input. Hence, it remembers and produces the last input. It is also referred to as the delay flip-flop. That's another name. But mostly it is more popular with the data flip-flop. So why is it delay? Because it delays a 0 or 1 applied to its input for a single clock pulse. So another one, so we have SR, we have D, and we have another one. Another useful flip-flop is the JK flip-flop. Like the SR flip-flop, it has two inputs. However, in this case, all possible combinations of input values are valid. So for this figure, 11.26 shows a gate implementation of the JK flip-flop. So as you can see, as you can remember, for the SR, we have only two inputs for the AND gates. But for here, we have the inputs for the Q, for the K, and then not Q for J, and then of course the J line and the clock pulse. So for this one, for JK For the end, we have 3 inputs. So next is we have figure 11.27 are the basic flip-flops. It shows the characteristic table along with those for the SR and D flip-flops. Note that the first 3 combinations are the same for the SR flip-flop. For the JK, as you can see. So it's just the same for the first 3. Q sub N 0 and 1 for JK, Q sub N 0 and 1. With no input asserted, the output is stable. If only the J input is asserted, the result is a set function, causing the output to be 1. If only the K input is asserted, the result is a reset function, causing the output to be 0. When both J and K are 1, so that's why 1, instead of the SR with no value here, for JK, if both are 1, the function performed is referred to as the toggle function. The output is reversed. So thus, if Q is 1 and 1 is applied both to J and K, then Q becomes 0. The reader should verify that the implementation of the figure produces this characteristic function. Okay, so how are these flip-flops can be used in a digital computer? So this can be used in a parallel register. So a parallel register consists of a set of 1-bit memories that can be read or written simultaneously. It is used to store data. The registers that we have discussed throughout this chapter are parallel registers. So the 8-bit parallel register of this figure, 11.28, illustrates the operation of a parallel register using the flip-flops. So 8-bit, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So a control signal labeled load, so this is the one with the clock signal as inputs for the AND gate. So controls writing into the register from signal lines D11 through D18. So this one, D11 until D18. So these lines might be the output of multiplexers so that the data from a variety of sources can be loaded into the register. Okay, next is also, aside from parallel registers, we have a shift register. So accepts or transfers information serially. Consider, for example, in this figure 11.29, which shows a 5-bit shift register constructed from clock D flip-flops. Data are input only to the leftmost flip-flop. And then coming from here. So with each clock pulse, data are shifted to the right one position, going to the right, and the rightmost bit is transferred out. So shift registers can be used to interface to serial input-output devices or I/O devices. In addition, they can be used within the ALU or the arithmetic logic unit to perform logical shift and rotate functions. In this latter capacity, they need to be equipped with parallel, read or write circuitry as well as serial. Okay, another application of sequential circuit is by means of a counter. So this is also a useful category. So a counter is a register whose value is easily incremented by 1 modulo the capacity of the register. That is, after the maximum value is achieved, the next increment sets the counter value to 0. Thus, a register made up of n flip-flops can count up to 2 raised to n minus 1. An example of a counter in the CPU is the program counter as previously shown in this presentation. So counters can be designated as asynchronous or synchronous depending on the way in which they operate. Asynchronous counters are relatively slow because the output of one flip-flop triggers a change in the status of the next flip-flop. In a synchronous counter, all of the flip-flops change state at the same time. So that's why it's called synchronous. Because the latter type is much faster, it is the kind used in CPUs. However, it is useful to begin the discussion with the description of an asynchronous counter. So, an asynchronous counter is also referred to as a ripple counter because the change that occurs to increment the counter starts at one end and ripples through to the other end. So this figure, 11.30, shows an implementation of a 4-bit counter. So we have to correct it. This is a 4-bit counter. So that's why 4-bit, 4 flip-flops, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4-bit counter using JK flip-flops together with a timing diagram that illustrates its behavior. The timing diagram is idealized that it does not show the propagation delay that occurs as the signals move down the series of flip-flops. The output of the leftmost flip-flop, the Q sub 0, leftmost, so this is this one, Q sub 0, is the least significant bit. So this is the Q sub 0, the least significant bit. The design should clearly be extended to an arbitrary number of bits cascading more flip-flops. In the illustrated implementation, the counter is incremented with each clock pulse. So the JK inputs to each flip-flop are held at a constant 1. This means that when there is a clock pulse, the output at Q will be inverted, such as if it is 1 going to 0 and 0 going to 1. Note that the change in state is shown as occurring with the falling edge of the clock pulse. This is known as an edge-triggered flip-flop. Using flip-flops that respond to the transition in a clock pulse rather than the pulse itself provides better timing control in complex circuits. If one looks at patterns of output for this counter, it can be seen that it cycles from 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, and then 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, and then 0, 0, and so on. So 0, 0, 4 zeros is 0, of course. 0, 0, 0, 1 is 1. And then it always circles, then 1, 1, 1, 0 is 14, then 1, 1, 1, 1 is 15. What if it's already the end? It will return to 0. So that's why next to 15 is again 1. And then it will be repeated in a loop. So the ripple counter has the disadvantage of the delay involved in changing value, which is proportional to the length of the counter. Of course, the longer the counter, the longer the delay. To overcome this disadvantage, CPUs make use of synchronous counters in which all of the flip-flops of the counter change at the same time. In this subsection, we present a design for a 3-bit synchronous counter. In doing so, we illustrate some basic concepts in the design of a synchronous circuit. So for a 3-bit counter, 3 flip-flops will be needed. Let us use the JK flip-flops as can be seen in the figure 11.31. So label the uncomplemented output of the 3 flip-flops A, B, and C. So we have A, B, and C respectively, with C representing the least significant bit. So this is the C. This is the least significant bit. The first step is to construct a truth table that relates the JK inputs and outputs to allow us to design the overall circuit. Such a truth table is shown in figure 11.31a. So this is 11.31a. So the first 3 columns shows the possible combinations of outputs A, B, and C. So A, B, and C. So from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, such a truth table is shown in this one. So the first 3 columns show the possible combinations of outputs A, B, and C. They are listed in the order that they will appear as the counter is incremented. So each row lists the current value of A, B, and C and the inputs to the 3 flip-flops that will be required to reach the next value of A, B, and C. So from this truth table, consider the first row. So this row, this is the first row. So we want the value of A to remain 0, the value of B to remain 0, and the value of C to go from 0 to 1 with the next application of a clock pulse. Because this is a counter, so this is the value of 0, it goes to 1. So that's why this will change. The excitation table shows that to maintain an output of 0, we must have inputs of J is equal to 0 and don't care for K. To effect the transition from 0 to 1, the input must be J is equal to 1 and K is equal to D or don't care. So these values are shown in the first row of the table. By similar reasoning, the remainder of the table can be filled in because of the value of the counter for the next state. So having constructed the truth table of figure 11.31a, we see that the table shows the required values of all of the j and k inputs as functions of the current values a, b, and c. With the aid of Carnot maps, so these are the Carnot maps, we can develop Boolean expressions for these 6 functions. This is shown in part B of the figure. So this is part B, the Carnot maps. So for example, the Carnot map for the variable j sub a, the j input to the flip-flop that produces the a output yields the expression j sub a is equal to b and c. When all 6 expressions are derived, it is a straightforward matter to design the actual circuit as shown in part C of the figure. Okay, actually j sub a is equal to 1 because of all of the values here, as it is corrected here based on the slides. So actually this is 1. So the value of j sub a, not b and c, should be 1 because all of the values here, including the don't care, must be grouped. If all of the squares are already occupied by ones or don't care, and this can be grouped by 1, then j sub a is equal to 1. Okay, next. For the J and K counter, we'll have another separate video for the discussion of how we derive the truth table, the Carnot map, and then the circuit. So as the level of integration provided by integrated circuits increases, other considerations apply. Early integrated circuits using small-scale integration or SSI provided from 1 to 10 gates on a chip. Each gate is treated independently in the building block approach described so far. To construct a logic function, a number of these chips are laid out on a printed circuit board and the appropriate pin interconnections are made. Increasing levels of integration made it possible to put more gates on a chip to make gate interconnections on the chip as well. This yields the advantages of decreased cost, decreased size, and increased speed because of on-chip delays are of shorter duration than off-chip delays. A design problem arises, however. For each particular logic function or set of functions, the layout of gates and interconnections on the chip must be designed. The cost and time involved in such custom chip design is high. Thus, it becomes attractive to develop a general purpose chip that can be readily adapted to specific purposes. This is the intent of the programmable logic device or the PLD. There are a number of different types of PLDs in commercial use. So in this table 11.1 lists some of the key terms and defines some of the most important types. So in this section, we first look at one of the simplest of such devices, the programmable logic array or the PLA, and then introduce perhaps the most important widely used type of PLD, the field programmable gate array. As you can see here, we have programmable logic array and programmable array logic. Actually, though the terms are interchanged, but this is actually two different implementations of PLDs. So the PLA, the programmable logic array, is based on the fact that any Boolean function or truth table can be expressed in a sum of products or SOP form, as we have seen. The PLA consists of a regular arrangement of NOT, AND, and OR gates on a chip. Each chip input is passed through a NOT gate, so that's why you have a NOT gate here, so that each input and its complement are available to each AND gate. So these are the AND gate. The output of each AND gate is available to each OR gate. So that's why we have a line here. So for the OR gate. And the output of each OR gate is a chip output. By making the appropriate connections, the arbitrary SOP expressions can be implemented. So for figure 11.32a shows a PLA with 3 inputs. So we have I sub 1, I sub 2, I sub 3. 8 gates. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. and 2 outputs for the OR. On the left is a programmable end array. The end array is programmed by establishing a connection between any PLA input or its negation and any gate input by connecting the corresponding lines at their point of intersection. And then on the right is a programmable OR array. So this one, the programmable OR array, which involves connecting AND gate outputs to the OR gate inputs. Most larger PLAs contain several hundred gates, 15 to 25 inputs, and 5 to 15 outputs. The connections from the inputs to the AND gates and from the AND gates to the OR gates are not specified until programming time. So, PLAs are manufactured in two different ways to allow easy programming for making connections. In the first, every possible connection is made through a fuse at every intersection point. The underside connections can then be later removed by blowing the fuses. So this type of PLA is referred to as a field programmable logic array or FPLA. Alternatively, the proper connections can be made during chip fabrication by using an appropriate mask supplied for a particular interconnection pattern. In either case, the PLA provides a flexible, inexpensive way of implementing digital logic functions. So for 11.32b shows a program PLA that realizes two Boolean expressions. So we have this one. This is already programmed because they already have connections. So maybe I'll have provide another example or video that discusses about the programmable logic array. Okay, so the PLA is an example of a simple PLD or the SPLD. The difficulty with increasing capacity of a strict SPLD architecture is that the structure of the programmable logic planes grows too quickly in size as the number of inputs is increased. The only feasible way to provide large capacity devices based on SPLD architectures is then to integrate the multiple SPLDs onto a single chip and provide interconnect to programmably connect the SPLD blocks together. Many commercial PLD products exist on the market today with this basic structure and are collectively referred to as the complex PLDs or CPLDs. The most important type of CPLD is the FPGA or the Field Programmable Gate Array. So an FPGA consists of an array of uncommitted circuit elements called logic blocks and interconnect resources. An illustration of a typical FPGA architecture is shown in this figure 11.33. The key components of an FPGA are the logic block. The configurable logic blocks are where the computation of the user circuit takes place. And then we have the I/O block as seen in the figure. The I/O blocks connect I/O pins to the circuitry on the chip. And then we have the interconnect rather. These are signal paths available for establishing connections among I/O or input-output blocks and logic blocks. So these are the interconnection, the paths here surrounding the logic block. And then next is we have this figure 11.34. We have shows an example of a simple logic block consisting of a D flip-flop, a 2-1 multiplexer, and a 16-bit lookup table. So the lookup table is a memory consisting of 16 1-bit elements so that 4 input lines are required to select one of the 16 bits. Larger blocks have larger lookup tables and multiple interconnected lookup tables. The combinational logic realized by the lookup table can be output directly or stored in the diff flip-flop and output synchronously. A separate 1-bit memory controls the multiplexer to determine whether the output comes directly from the lookup table or from the flip-flop. By interconnecting numerous logic blocks, very complex logic functions can be easily implemented. So we're already on the end part of chapter 11. So to summarize, so for chapter 11, we have discussed all about the Boolean algebra, the gates, combinational circuits, and then under combinational circuits are the implementation of Boolean functions, multiplexers, decoders, read-only memory, and others. And then for the sequential circuits, we have flip-flops, registers, and counters, which are the applications of sequential circuits. And then for programmable logic array, we have the programmable logic devices rather, we have programmable logic array or PLA and the field programmable gate array or the FPGA. So I hope you did learn something with chapter 11 all about digital logic. So again, thank you very much. Good day and stay safe. See you on chapter 12.